The National Motor Racing Museum has a whole bunch of cars and bikes on display, and this area where the touring cars live is probably what people are most familiar with Mount Panorama and Bathurst racing. And the cars behind us are all from the career of Peter Brock. So this car is one of the absolute standout highlights in the museum's collection. It is the 1984 VK Commodore Group C, driven by Peter Brock and Larry Perkins, and they won Bathurst 1000 in 1984. It's a really important car in the history of Australian touring car racing. It was what they called the last of the big bangers, so the end of the Australian-developed Group C touring car formula, and that was being replaced by an international formula called Group A. So this was the last year of the big flared guards, the Australian engines. They were really tough and iconic motor vehicles. So mechanically, this car was basically similar in some respects to the production car. Standard normal bonnet setup, but it's a 5-litre Holden V8. Some of the race equipment on it, it had a fancier oil system so that the oil would stay cooler. It has a twin carburetor set up for maximum horsepower, good exhaust to make sure that it makes a lot of power, and it's been gone through from one end to the other to make sure that the car was reliable enough to go flat out for 1,000 kilometres around Mount Panorama. This is not the original engine, but it has a lot of the original parts on it, and it is a race engine from 1984. So it is a similar specification to what this car would have raced with when it was originally in action. In the Group C era, so that started in 1974 through to 1984, the cars by regulation had to have their factory interior in them. So when you have a look at this car, you'll see it's got the factory rear seat with the roll cage going through it. It's got the normal door trims with the window winders. The ashtrays have been taken out, but everything else had to stay as it was. No carpets. It still had to be as the car was built. It has racing seats in the front for safety purposes. They had extra instrumentation, but they still have the original dash and all of the fittings that a production car would. Now today, the cars are very different. They're built as a racing chassis. They are a purpose-built machine. Lots and lots of carbon fibre, electronic dashes. The driver actually sits closer to the middle of the car and not in the standard position, so very much built for purpose, whereas this is a road car that's been modified to race. So what you can see here is a couple of holes in the boot lid. They are part of the dry brake fuel system. So in the 1970s, they were refuelling with drums of petrol and a funnel. They had an occasional refuelling fire in the pits, which was a bit scary, particularly in those days where fireproof equipment might have been a pair of shorts and a t-shirt. So as the racing evolved, this system was brought in, and it's an aviation style system. So they have a purpose-built fuel churn. The churn is turned upside down and the connections are made, and there's no possibility for fuel to leak out the outside. And then inside the boot of the car, you'll see here, these are the fuel valves here, and the fuel goes in through here. It goes through a system into a large, what's called a drop tank, so a tank mounted right down low in the car, so that when it's full and really heavy, the weight is nice and low, so it helps the handling of the car. And as the tank empties out, it doesn't change the balance of the car when it's racing quite so much as it would if it was up high. Race fans all around Australia know that the number 05 is Peter Brock's number, but the way that came about was really interesting. Brock was a road safety advocate down in Victoria, and it was around the time in the mid-70s when they brought in the drink driving law. So the blood alcohol limit was 0.05, and Brock was using, I guess, his racing to promote road safety, and took up the number 0.05 in 1975 at the Sandown 500. The regulations of the racing at the time, though, were you couldn't have a number smaller than 1, so the decimal point was dropped off, it became 05, and in fact that number stayed with Peter Brock for the majority of the rest of his career. There were very, very few times where he ran in a car that wasn't 05. Since Brock has been killed in 2006, the number has been retired. So you'll see number 5 out there on the track, but you will never see 05 ever again. Because this car is, getting on for, 36 years old now, the Dayglow paint at the time was never really the most stable paint. It looked great the day that it was applied, but from there, light and ultraviolet light would damage the paint and fade it. And as you can see, the paint has changed colour a little bit over the years, but the car's largely been unrestored since it raced in 1984. So it's just part of the ageing process. None of us go so well after a few years, and this car is no exception. If you haven't been up close and personal to a race car before, the thing you probably will notice is, unlike your road car, there's no grip or no tread on the tyres. On a road car, you need to be able to drive in various conditions. You need to be able to have traction on loose surfaces. But in a race car on a circuit, these things are designed to give the maximum amount of grip on a dry track. So the tyres are very, very soft ordinarily. These ones have got old with age, but usually you can actually leave fingerprint marks in the surface of the tyre. They are so soft. However, when it rains, they have to come in, because this sort of tyre on a wet track will be like driving on ice. So they come in and pick up a set of grooved wet weather tyres, and they're much more like a road tyre. The Holden dealer team built these cars specially for the endurance races in '84. They only raced 3 times. This car and the teammate were used to really avenge Holden's loss in 1977. So in 1977, the Moffat team finished 1-2 here at Bathurst, and was an absolute devastating blow for the Holden fans. So for the end of the Group C era, the Holden dealer team in these special cars managed to finish first and second, and they really gave the Holden faithful a high point to go out of the Group C era.